So the NBA draft is in the books. Pretty uneventful second round for the Bulls anyway. I'm a little surprised that we didn't see a single trade coming from the Bulls at any point in the draft. I actually thought the Bulls were going to be a little more active on the trade front during the draft, but there have been some trade rumblings of the Bulls looking to move Nikola Vucevic in recent days, which good luck with that. And of course, the Bulls are still looking to trade Zach LaVine. That of course has been ongoing. And also, what's next for DeRozan, who is set to become an unrestricted free agent on Sunday if the Bulls and DeMar don't reach an agreement on an extension. But with the draft now concluded, we're just a couple of days away from the start of free agency. I wanted to discuss the million-dollar question that's going on for the Bulls right now. Is what is the direction of this franchise in going into next season? Are they now setting up to go into a rebuild or take a step back and focusing on a youth movement, or are they just making some moves here and there and still looking to try and compete and get to the playoffs? Well, based on what has transpired in the past week or so, as well as some of the remarks from AK after day one of the draft, we can draw some conclusions on what the future of this franchise is going to look like, and we'll talk about it further in this video. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bull Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video, Underdog Fantasy. Just because the NBA season is over, it does not mean that you can't partake in fantasy sports, drafting, and pick'ems between baseball, WNBA games, golf, UFC, all of it. Underdog Fantasy is a super easy, user-friendly platform, and if you use the code Bull Central, they're going to give you up to $250 in bonus cash, as well as a free pick in the lobby once you sign up. So check it out. I'll leave a link to the site and the code in the description and pinned comment if you guys are interested. Also, guys, a big shout out and thank you to all of you for getting the channel to 40,000 subscribers. It means so much to me for a guy who is just a big time Bulls fan like you all, and thought that he would start sharing his thoughts about the team on YouTube. And to see where it's gotten to now could not have been done without you guys and your support. So really appreciate it. And hey, now the road to 50K begins. But anyway, now of course, something we've been talking about for over a year now, dating all the way back to last season, is that the Bulls, this team, simply put, does not work. They have hit their ceiling as currently constructed. Yeah, it was great seeing how well they played and everything was working in those first 35 games or whatever it was before Lonzo Ball got injured, but clinging on to this idea that somehow they're going to be able to bring that back when it's very possible Lonzo won't be able to play again, or if he does, he will not be the same player. But also the fact that your core guys that you were building with in that 2021 season between DeMar, Vooch, and LaVine are all now 3 years older. We've seen what this team can do. They're a play-in team at best. And so going into this offseason, knowing that this was the third go-around in this iteration of the roster, we knew that this was likely the last chance for this group to figure things out going into this next season. The players themselves even said as much during media day before the start of the season. And when the Bulls more or less repeated what they did from last year, a play-in team that couldn't make the playoffs, the time for change was now. And Arturas Karnisovas even acknowledged and admitted that at his end-of-season press conference, that he recognized the need for change and that time was now. Now, up until that point, it was the first time publicly AK conceded to defeat, that this roster that he put together had failed. But acknowledging change in the form of a rebuild was not something he was willing to admit. In fact, he even said he wanted to see this team win 10 more games and a goal of making the playoffs. That's the opposite of taking a step back and rebuilding and still trying to be competitive. But after AK's comments on the night of the draft, things have fundamentally shifted with the approach that he's taking with this roster. He may not publicly have said that the Bulls are about to embark on a rebuild, but reading between the lines, when you look at the trade they made for Josh Giddey and selecting Matas Buzelis, a 19-year-old project player, versus some of the prospects who were more NBA ready, and it's pretty clear that the Bulls are about to commence yet another rebuild. And really, this all hinges on one thing, and it's something we're going to find out in a matter of days, if not already by the time you're listening to this, and that's the future of DeMar DeRozan with this organization. Now, up until draft night, the belief around the organization was that the Bulls wanted to keep DeMar on this roster, that it was their priority and desire to get him to stay and sign him to an extension. Even leading up to the end of the season, when the press had talked to DeMar, he himself had expressed his desire to remain with the team and was almost acknowledging that one way or another they were going to be able to get a deal done. He looked like a guy who knew that he was going to be getting an extension with the Bulls. And throughout this time since the end of the season, and talking about the Bulls and their cap sheet on this channel, trade options and what the roster would look like going into next season, it was always with the assumption that DeMar was going to be here. But when AK was asked about DeMar's impending free agency and whether they'll actually still look to want to re-sign him, AK shifted his tone, saying that they're going to look at everything. Everything is on the table, and that is an option as well. Now, you guys know me, I've said this before, I still think there is value in having a savvy veteran leader who can guide and mentor your young players even in a rebuild. We saw how the Bulls' previous rebuild went with Markkanen, Wendell Carter Jr., Zach, and Coby White. They all really lacked that. Despite their talent, they simply could not close games because they didn't have veteran leadership. And so I do think there is something to be said about still having DeMar on the roster as that player who can help elevate and develop the young core. Same with a guy like Alex Caruso. But the problem the Bulls find themselves in is that even if they wanted DeMar to take on that role in a rebuild, the financials just don't work for the Bulls to be able to re-sign him and have the team still remain under the luxury tax. Now, I've explained the Bulls' salary cap situation and why they would be so hard-pressed to keep a player like DeMar in prior videos, so I won't reiterate that here. But in short, the Bulls are already an over-the-cap team, a team that only has so much space between where they are before they hit that tax line. And that doesn't even include potential extensions for Patrick Williams and DeMar DeRozan. Re-signing those guys, even to their market value, would put them over the tax, assuming all the other things remained equal. So even if DeMar wanted to stay and the Bulls wanted him to take on that role as the veteran leader to help the young guys develop, it's going to be so challenging to do so given their cap constraints. And so I find it increasingly more likely, especially after the Caruso trade and the drafting of Buzelis, that DeMar has played his last game with the Bulls. That he'll either leave in free agency and the Bulls let him walk for nothing, or they execute a sign and trade of some kind. And if DeMar is gone, that's it. The Bulls are in a full-blown rebuild because that drastically lowers the floor of this team if they don't have DeMar, which puts them in a much better position to keep their pick in 2025 that is top 10 protected. Yeah, they would still have Zach LaVine and Vucevic, but if DeMar walks, they're going to be even more motivated to move both of those guys, even if it means selling them for pennies on the dollar. And look, even knowing that the Bulls' quote-unquote mid-3 is still on the roster at this point in time, it's pretty clear they're already making the shift to a younger core. When you look at the fact that they now have a 21-year-old, presumably starting point guard, you drafted a 19-year-old big man that isn't quite NBA ready, but has a ton of upside with his positional size, ball handling, passing, and shot blocking. They have their two young budding guards who both had breakout seasons last year in Coby and Aya, who are both only 24 years old. Patrick Williams, who I still maintain they're going to re-sign, whether it be before free agency begins or matching any offer sheet he gets. Dalen Terry, Julian Phillips, like it doesn't take a basketball genius to see that the Bulls are already assembling a young core to build with for the future. And I think what was most telling about AK's comments after the draft, aside from his change in tone on re-signing DeMar, was actually his opening remarks, where he referenced back to his comments at the end of the season that they needed to make changes, and then said, quote, "And we have started that process. While I cannot speak to all the potential changes, it's hard to predict what we might look like in a week or two." In my view, that's AK saying, yeah, this rebuild is imminent. I just can't say it right now because free agency hasn't opened yet. And obviously with free agency comes the potential of further trades as movement of players pick up throughout the league in those first days of free agency, or of course sign-in trades, which could potentially have already been worked out and agreed upon, but they obviously can't make that information public since that would be considered tampering until free agency opens throughout the NBA. Now, AK did say in his press conference that the direction of the team would not be dictated by trying to keep their pick in 2025, but honestly, I don't believe that. First, he's not going to openly say, yeah, we're going to intentionally tank to try and keep that pick, as he doesn't want to get in trouble by the league. And he's also not going to say that now when he still has these older veterans on his roster who probably don't want to hear that this team's goal is to start losing next year in the event he's not able to trade one of them. So look, while AK might not be able to openly say it yet, and this will all become clear by next week, based on the moves they've made thus far and the increasing number of young guys on this roster, all signs are pointing to the Bulls going in the direction of a rebuild, which I'm sure is music to a lot of Bulls fans' ears, as we really have had to endure some painful basketball over the last 2.5 seasons. We'll find out soon enough though. It's going to make for an interesting weekend with free agency opening up on Sunday evening. I'll obviously keep you guys posted as free agency kicks off and any news or updates with the team. In the meantime though, as always, be sure to subscribe and I will see you guys in the next one.